Hannah was only 26, but she often felt as if she had lived through decades of battles just to protect her happiness. By day, she worked as an interior architect at a small but ambitious design studio. Her eye for detail and her passion for creating beautiful spaces made her stand out, even if she didn't always receive the recognition she deserved. But in her personal life, Hannah knew she was the luckiest woman alive because she had found Mark. Mark was calm and grounded, an engineer who built bridges by profession, but who had also built an unshakable bridge between their two hearts. He was gentle, with a quiet humor that could ease her worst days. For 4 years, they had been inseparable, and when he finally asked her to marry him, Hannah felt as though her world had snapped into place. On paper, their lives looked perfect, a young couple in love, ready to promise forever. But behind the smiles and congratulations lay a shadow that Hannah could never escape. Margaret, Mark's mother. Margaret was the kind of woman who treated her son as if he were a possession rather than a person. To her, Mark was not just her child, but the golden prize she had raised, and no one, certainly not Hannah, was ever going to be good enough for him. From the first moment Hannah had stepped into Margaret's house, she felt it. Margaret had offered a thin smile, polite enough, but her eyes had said it clearly. You don't belong here. From that day on, every move Hannah made was judged. If Hannah cooked, Margaret would compare it to the meals Mark had loved as a little boy. If Hannah wore something elegant, Margaret would mutter, "Perhaps a bit too much for you, dear." Every word, every glance, every silence, it was all designed to remind Hannah that she was an outsider, intruding on Margaret's perfect world. Mark tried to soothe her. "She's just protective," he whispered, whenever Hannah's eyes filled with frustration. "You are my life, Hannah. Don't let her get to you." But Margaret wasn't simply protective, she was possessive. She wanted to control everything, especially the wedding. At first, she cloaked her interference in innocent suggestions: the color of the flowers, the length of the guest list, the choice of music. But those suggestions quickly became demands. Mark has always wanted a string quartet, not a DJ. You must invite the cousins from your father's side. It would be disgraceful not to. That dress is far too plain. My son deserves a bride who shines. Each comment felt like a small dagger. Hannah tried to swallow her pride, tried to ignore the barbs, but deep down, she wondered if Margaret would ever let her truly have her own wedding. And then, the morning of the ceremony arrived. Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through sheer curtains, her heart pounding with excitement and dread. Her wedding dress hung gracefully on the chair, glowing softly in the light, as if it too was waiting for her. Her sisters fluttered around her, helping with her hair and makeup. "You look like a princess," they whispered, their eyes shining with joy. Hannah smiled, but her mind was restless. Beneath the laughter and the warmth, a darker thought gnawed at her. What will Margaret do today? How will she try to ruin this for me? The ceremony hall was stunning. White roses lined the aisle, soft music floated through the air, and guests arrived dressed in their best, greeting one another with smiles. The day was everything Hannah had dreamed of, or at least it should have been. But as Hannah stood ready to walk down the aisle, she felt it. Margaret's eyes. Piercing, cold, hidden behind a practiced smile. Hannah's chest tightened. It was as if her mother-in-law's gaze alone could strip away her happiness. Hannah gripped her bouquet tightly. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but deep inside, she knew one thing with certainty. Margaret would not let this day pass without a fight. The ceremony began like a dream. The music swelled softly, the guests rose to their feet, and Hannah walked slowly down the aisle, her veil catching the light like spun silk. Mark's face lit up when he saw her, pure love, pure pride, and for a moment, Hannah's fears melted. This is our day, she thought. No one can take it from us. The vows were spoken with trembling voices, the rings exchanged with shaking hands. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the room erupted with applause, and Hannah felt joy rush through her like a tide. Mark leaned down and kissed her gently, and the world seemed to pause in that perfect moment. But perfect moments never lasted long around Margaret. The reception was lavish. Guests filled the hall, glasses clinking, laughter rising above the music. Hannah was glowing, cheeks flushed with happiness as she and Mark greeted family and friends. She barely noticed Margaret, at first, seated regally at the front table, her lips pressed into a thin smile that never quite reached her eyes. Then the microphone was passed for the speeches. Mark's best man spoke with warmth, telling lighthearted stories that made everyone laugh. Hannah's sister followed, her words filled with tenderness, bringing Hannah close to tears. And then it was Margaret's turn. She stood gracefully, her posture rigid, her smile fixed. The room quieted in anticipation. Everyone expected the proud mother of the groom to give a heartfelt blessing. Hannah braced herself, gripping Mark's hand under the table. "My son," Margaret began, her voice smooth, "has always been destined for greatness. Even as a boy, I knew he deserved only the best in life. I raised him to have high standards, to never settle for less than he deserves." She paused, letting the words hang. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Hannah's stomach tightened. Margaret's eyes flicked briefly toward Hannah before she continued. "Of course, every mother hopes her son will marry a woman worthy of him, a woman who matches his strength, his ambition, his talent, and, well, let's just say sometimes life surprises us." A few uncomfortable chuckles rose from the crowd, though many guests exchanged puzzled glances. Hannah felt her cheeks burn. Mark shifted beside her, his jaw tightening, but Margaret wasn't finished. "Still, my son has always had a generous heart. He believes in giving chances. Perhaps he sees something I don't. Perhaps he can make her better." That last sentence hit Hannah like a slap. The implication was clear. She was not enough. She had never been enough. Not for Margaret, not for this family. Hannah's throat closed, her chest rising and falling quickly. She could feel the tears burning at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now, not in front of Margaret's satisfied gaze. The hall was buzzing, whispers darting across tables. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others smirked as though enjoying the spectacle. Hannah sat frozen, her fingers digging into her bouquet, her knuckles white. Margaret ended her speech with a toast. "To my son, the brightest man I know, may your strength carry you through life, no matter what challenges you face." She raised her glass high, deliberately not acknowledging Hannah. The applause that followed was hesitant, scattered, more out of obligation than joy. But the damage had been done. Hannah felt stripped bare in front of everyone she knew, her dignity torn apart under the glare of chandeliers and the sound of forced clapping. She looked at Mark, whose face was pale with anger, his eyes hard as stone. He squeezed her hand under the table, a silent promise. But the humiliation had already settled deep into her bones. And across the room, one guest sat silently, his eyes fixed not on Margaret, but on Hannah. He looked tense, restless, as though carrying a weight he could no longer keep hidden. Hannah didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, that man would stand, and everything Margaret had tried to destroy would turn against her. The applause faded like a wave pulling back from shore. leaving behind the hiss of whispers and the clink of uneasy glasses. Hannah sat perfectly still, chin lifted just enough to keep the tears from tipping over. Across the table, Mark's hand tightened around hers, a wordless apology he shouldn't have needed to make. Music rose again, something safe and cheerful the band scrambled to play, but the room didn't follow. Conversations fractured into little islands. Did she really say that? How cruel! Well, maybe she's right. Hannah felt the words skim the surface of her skin like cold rain. She could have borne a private insult. It was the performance that knifed her. The spectacle of it, the smugness in Margaret's voice, as if she were polishing a trophy. "Bathroom?" Mark whispered. Hannah nodded. They stood together, navigating smiles that weren't quite smiles. As they passed the head table, Margaret lifted her glass in lazy acknowledgement, her mouth curving with a satisfaction that turned Hannah's stomach. She wanted this. She rehearsed this. Inside the dressing room, the door clicked shut, and the noise of the reception fell away. Hannah set the bouquet down and gripped the edge of the marble counter until her knuckles blanched. Her veil quivered in the mirror, a small flag in a private storm. "I'm so sorry," Mark said, voice rough. "I'll talk to her. What will you say?" Hannah asked softly, meaning her eyes in the glass. That she was unfair? She knows. The truth settled into the room like fog. Margaret didn't slip. She aimed. Mark's jaw worked. "You're my wife. Not a project to fix. Not someone to make better. She doesn't get to rewrite you." Something loosened in Hannah's chest. She reached back, undid a pin, and let the veil fall to her shoulders. "Then don't let her rewrite us out there." "I won't," he said, and there was steel in it. When they returned, the room had shifted. The laughter was too bright in places, too forced, while other tables huddled in low, urgent murmurs. At the far side of the hall, a man sat alone at a small table near the bandstand, mid-40s, neat suit, the posture of someone trying not to take up space. He watched the dance floor with a fixed stare, fingers circling the base of his water glass as if he were winding a clock. Hannah didn't know him. She noticed him because he, like everyone else, wasn't watching her, he was watching Margaret. "Who's that?" she asked under her breath. Mark followed her gaze. "Ethan Ward, old family acquaintance. He used to serve on one of the charity boards with my mother. I haven't seen him in years." Hannah filed the name away without intending to. Ethan's eyes were storm quiet, the kind that had seen too much and learned to keep it. He stood once, as if to move, then sat again, jaw tightening. He'd heard the speech. Everyone had. But his tension felt different. Not shock or gossip, but burden. Margaret floated from table to table, dispensing graciousness like perfume. She touched arms, left kisses in the air, accepted compliments that weren't quite compliments. When she reached Hannah and Mark again, her smile was powdered sugar over a blade. "Darling," she cooed to Mark, ignoring Hannah entirely. "Shall we move up the mother-son dance? I think everyone would enjoy something elegant." "We'll follow the schedule," Mark said evenly. Her eyes flashed, just a flicker, then smoothed. "Of course, tradition matters." She turned her head, as if finally noticing Hannah. "And you, dear, you look charming. So brave to choose a dress that's simple." She drifted away before an answer was possible. Hannah's breath hitched. The simple dress she'd chosen on purpose, to feel like herself, not an ornament, now sounded like a failure. She swallowed hard and squeezed Mark's fingers until he winced. "I'm okay." It wasn't true, but it would be. The cake arrived, towering and white, sparklers hissing. The bandleader tapped the mic, voice warm, ushering the crowd back into celebration. As the room tilted toward joy by sheer force of habit, Hannah saw Ethan Ward stand again, more decisively this time.
He took one step toward the stage, then stopped when Margaret reappeared at his elbow and murmured something to him without looking at his face. He stood still, like a man remembering a chain he'd promised not to feel. Hannah watched their profiles, Margaret's smile, Ethan's shut mouth. A thread of unease stitched through her. Whatever history bound them wasn't friendly. "Dance with me," Mark said softly. They moved into the lights. Hannah rested her cheek against his shoulder and finally let one tear escape where only his suit would know. Around them, the room softened. Friends swayed, candles flickered, cameras flashed. For a minute, she let the music dull the edges of Margaret's words. Then Ethan stepped into the light. He didn't climb onto the stage, not at first. He approached the bandleader and spoke quietly. The song wound down on a gentle chord. The bandleader glanced toward Margaret, then toward Mark and Hannah, and hesitated. Ethan nodded once, a request wrapped around a decision. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader said, clearing his throat, "we have a guest who would like to say a few words." A ripple traveled across the room. Hannah felt Mark tense beneath her hand. Margaret turned from a cluster of admirers, pearls catching the light. When she saw Ethan holding the microphone, the smile on her face froze. Millimeters, no more, but enough for Hannah to see it. Ethan's voice was steady, if a touch too careful. "I won't keep you long. This is a celebration, and I'm not a man who enjoys speeches. But I have something on my conscience, and after hearing certain remarks tonight, I can't keep it any longer." Silence fell like snowfall, soft but absolute. Margaret took a single step forward, that powdered smile returning to its place. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "perhaps this isn't—" He didn't look at her. His gaze found Hannah instead, and in it she saw an apology she didn't yet understand. He lifted the mic a fraction higher. "Margaret," he said, the first crack of steel entering his tone, "some truths belong to the people you've tried to bury." The room drew breath. Hannah's fingers tightened around Mark's, pulse rushing in her ears. Ethan inhaled, braced himself against the silence, and began.
Ethan's words hung in the air like thunder rumbling in the distance, the kind that warned of a storm about to break. Guests leaned forward, forks hovering mid-air, champagne glasses trembling slightly as hands froze. All eyes shifted between him and Margaret, waiting for the spark to ignite. Margaret's smile hardened, though her voice stayed smooth. "Ethan, dear, let's not drag old stories into such a beautiful day. My son's wedding isn't the place." But Ethan didn't lower the microphone. His hand shook just once before his grip tightened, knuckles whitening. "No, Margaret, this is exactly the place. Because tonight, you stood here in front of everyone and humiliated Hannah. You made her feel small, and I can't stay silent, not when I know the truth about you." A collective gasp spread through the hall. Hannah's stomach flipped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't understand what was happening, but she felt it. Something was about to shatter. Margaret's laugh was thin, brittle. "The truth about me, really, Ethan? You've always had such a flair for dramatics, perhaps too much champagne." But Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers, and the room felt colder, sharper. "Tell them, Margaret. Tell them how you nearly lost this family everything. Tell them about the money." The crowd stirred, whispers darting between tables like sparks catching dry grass. Hannah's throat tightened. Money? Mark's hand tightened around hers. "What is he talking about?" he whispered, but Hannah could only shake her head. Margaret's mask faltered just for an instant. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, sharp as knives. "You don't know what you're saying," she hissed, but the microphone carried her words further than she intended. Ethan drew a breath. His voice rose firmer now, each word deliberate.
For years, Margaret has presented herself as the perfect matriarch, the one who built everything, who sacrificed for her son. But the truth? She nearly bankrupted this family's company. She forged signatures. She moved money in secret. And when it all collapsed, it wasn't her who fixed it. It was others who covered for her mistakes. The hall exploded with noise. Gasps, shocked murmurs, the clatter as silverware dropped on plates. Guests craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of Margaret's expression. Hannah sat frozen, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had expected cruelty from Margaret, but this? She looked at Mark, who stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Mark's hand slammed on the table. Lies! He barked, his composure cracking. Baseless lies. But Ethan pressed on, his voice cutting through the chaos. You think no one remembers, Margaret? You think the past stays buried? I was there. I saw the documents. I watched as you begged others to clean up the mess. And now you dare to stand here, pretending to be superior, ridiculing Hannah as if she isn't worthy of your son? The silence that followed was deafening. Guests stared at Margaret, their admiration crumbling into suspicion. The golden image she had cultivated for years cracked before their eyes. Margaret's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as she tried to gather her defense. But no words came, only fury. Hannah's chest rose and fell quickly, a strange mixture of vindication and disbelief surging through her. For once, Margaret wasn't untouchable. The queen had been dragged from her throne. Ethan lowered the microphone, his voice softer now. Hannah, you are more worthy than she will ever admit. Don't let her cruelty make you doubt that. The crowd erupted. Applause from some tables, murmurs of outrage from others. But Hannah barely heard them. She sat in stunned silence, Mark's arm wrapped tightly around her. For the first time since the day began, Margaret looked small. And Hannah realized the battle she had feared all along was finally turning.
The reception hall was no longer filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Instead, it buzzed like a hive disturbed, voices rising in shocked tones, chairs scraping against the floor as guests shifted uncomfortably. Margaret, once so poised, stood trembling with fury, her face red, her pearls rattling softly against her collarbone. "How dare you!" she spat at Ethan, her voice cracking under the weight of rage. "You come into my son's wedding and spread lies, pathetic lies!" But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood tall, shoulders squared, and met her eyes with calm conviction. "They aren't lies, Margaret. You know that as well as I do. You nearly destroyed everything. Your family's name, the company your husband built. You gambled with what wasn't yours to gamble. And when the debts closed in, you begged others to save you. I was one of them." Gasps rippled through the room again. Hannah's heart pounded as she looked from Ethan to Margaret. This wasn't the polished, untouchable woman she had always known. This was someone cornered, stripped of her mask, her cruelty suddenly laid bare. Mark rose slowly to his feet beside Hannah. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly that Hannah thought he might shatter a tooth. "Is it true, Mother?" His voice was steady, but underneath it trembled with betrayal. Margaret's eyes darted to him, desperate. "Mark, don't listen. He's twisting things, trying to humiliate me. You know me. You know everything I've done has been for you." "For me?" Mark's voice grew harder. "Humiliating Hannah in front of everyone tonight? Was that for me? Or was that just you, proving you still think I belong only to you?" Margaret faltered. Her lips opened, closed again. For once, words didn't flow easily. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "She covered her tracks well, Mark. Most of the family never knew. But the truth has a way of seeping out. I have the records, the transfers, the signed documents. She risked everything, your father's legacy, for her pride. And tonight, when I heard her tear into Hannah, I realized I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Whispers shot through the crowd again. Guests leaned closer, scandal shining in their eyes. Hannah felt their gazes, but for once, they weren't on her with pity. They were on Margaret, dissecting every flicker of her expression. Margaret's composure cracked further. She slammed her palm against the table, rattling the glasses. "Enough! You have no right to speak here." But her voice betrayed her. It wasn't power, it was panic. Mark stepped forward, his hand lifting as if to block her words from reaching Hannah. "You had no right to insult my wife, not after what you've done. If Ethan hadn't spoken, would you have ever told me the truth?" Margaret's mouth worked soundlessly. Her eyes glistened, though with fury more than remorse. I protected you. I carried everything so you wouldn't have to." "You lied," Mark cut in, his tone sharper than Hannah had ever heard. "You built your throne on secrets, and you've spent your life tearing down anyone who threatens it. Hannah deserved respect. Instead, you gave her humiliation. But it's not her reputation that's ruined tonight. It's yours." The hall erupted with applause. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to drown out Margaret's strangled protest. Enough to send a flush of relief through Hannah's chest. For the first time that evening, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the outsider at Margaret's table. She felt like someone who belonged. Margaret sank back into her chair, her face pale now, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted around the room, but no one rushed to her defense. Not this time. Ethan set the microphone down. His shoulders sagged as if releasing years of burden. He gave Hannah a small nod, a silent apology, before retreating toward the back of the hall. Mark turned to Hannah, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "You're my wife, and nothing she says will ever change that." Hannah's throat tightened, but she managed to smile, tears shimmering in her eyes. For the first time that night, she felt strong. Margaret's empire of words had crumbled, and all that remained was the truth. The hall still buzzed with shock. Margaret sat frozen at the head table, a queen dethroned, her shoulders stiff and her face drained of color. The woman who had once commanded every room with her voice now struggled to lift her glass without her hand trembling. For the first time, Hannah saw her not as untouchable, but as small. The silence after Ethan's revelation had cracked something wide open. Guests whispered, heads bent together, but their eyes kept drifting toward Hannah. For once, though, they weren't pitying eyes. They were filled with sympathy and respect. Hannah rose to her feet. Her knees shook, but her heart was steady. Mark looked at her with both pride and fear. "You don't have to—" "Yes," Hannah whispered. "I do." She moved toward the microphone, the hem of her dress brushing softly against the floor. The crowd hushed instantly, waiting. Hannah's hand trembled as she took hold of the stand, but her voice rang clear when she spoke. "When I walked into this day, I thought my biggest challenge would be nerves or a misplaced step down the aisle. I never imagined that the greatest test would come from the woman who was supposed to welcome me into her family. But maybe it's better this way, because now everyone has seen the truth, not just about me, but about who we all are." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hannah drew a shaky breath and continued. "Margaret tried to humiliate me tonight. She tried to remind me that I wasn't worthy of her son. But what I've learned is this: worth isn't decided by cruel words or by secrets whispered in the dark. Worth is proven by love, by loyalty, by the people who stand beside you even when the world doesn't." Her eyes shifted to Mark, whose gaze was locked on her, tears bright in his eyes. "And I know
without any doubt, that Mark chose me, not by mistake, not as a project to fix, but because we belong together. The room erupted in applause, warm and unrestrained. Hannah's chest loosened, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Not forced, not trembling, but full and genuine. Margaret's face twisted, but she stayed seated. The power she had always wielded, through sharp remarks, through intimidation, through carefully curated lies, was gone. No one came to her defense, not a single guest. Mark stood and joined Hannah at the microphone. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his voice strong. "My wife just said everything that needs to be said. Tonight was supposed to be about love, about joy, and that's what it will be, no matter what shadows tried to steal it." The crowd cheered louder, glasses raised high. For once, Margaret's presence didn't dominate the room. Hannah and Mark did. The music started again, this time softer, more deliberate, as if the band knew they were giving Hannah her moment. Mark pulled her gently onto the dance floor, and the guests circled around them, clapping and swaying. Hannah laid her head against his chest, her tears finally falling, not from pain, but from release. Around the edges of the room, Margaret sat alone. Her pearls gleamed in the candlelight, but no one leaned in to hear her words anymore. Her empire of control had collapsed in a single evening, exposed by truth and silenced by courage. As Hannah turned in Mark's arms, she caught Ethan's eyes across the hall. He gave her a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that justice in some form had been served. She nodded back, gratitude swelling in her chest. When the song ended, the crowd cheered again, louder than ever. Hannah looked out at the sea of faces, not with fear, but with strength. This was her wedding. This was her beginning, and Margaret's cruelty would never define her again. For years, Margaret had tried to make Hannah feel small, but tonight, Hannah had stood tall, and the truth had made her unshakable. The day that began with humiliation ended with triumph, and Hannah knew love had won.